All right. Thanks, Jessica.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name's Jen Knapp. I'm the Dean of the School of Communication, Media, and the Arts. I'm going to moderate our conversation today. So I'm going to go around the room. We'll introduce our panelists. And in addition to our panelists, Jessica Harris is here, just in case you're wondering who's in the room. So start with Christina. Christina Vasquez is the director of CSTEP. If you're not familiar with what CSTEP stands for, it's the Collegiate Science and Technology Entry Program. Then we have Scott Furlong, our Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Kristen Eichhorn, Dean of Graduate Studies, Sarah Wiseman, Penfield Library Director, and then Joey Teese, who's the Director of the Office of Learning Services and our Educational Opportunity Program. So I'm going to give, we've got sort of 4 questions we're going to try to discuss today. I figure if we can do 8 to 10 minutes per question, we can have some time for a little Q&A or conversation at the end. But to give you an overview of the plan for today and why we're here. So I've been thinking a lot lately about my path and how I got to this position. And there's a lot of key relationships along the way that have led me to this position and even to SUNY Oswego. And some of those relationships are literally sitting at this table, Dr. Kristen Eichhorn. So, you know, as Dean, I have a responsibility to think about and actively work toward building a climate that is healthy for our students, our staff, and our faculty. And certainly that includes paying attention to diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, things like that. And it's something that, you know, obviously the campus is incredibly dedicated to in terms of DEI. And we spend a lot of time talking about how we can diversify our staff and our faculty to better represent our student population. But then when you think very practically about how many new faculty and staff we're hiring every year, it's just really, we're never going to catch up to the students that we have here. So what else can we be doing? Because that's who we are at SUNY Oswego. So we go toward those problems. How can we contribute to increasing the diversity of the academy? So we came up with this panel conversation about a pipeline to the Professoriate. And really it hits all of our strengths as an institution. Certainly we're great mentors and teachers. We've got lots of opportunities for students to engage in creative and scholarly activity. And we've got this really rock solid foundation and commitment to DEI and social justice. So on that note, I think we'll go into our questions and have our panelists just sort of join in as they feel compelled. But my first question is just going to be if this will work on Zoom, just by a show of hands, and then you can give personal anecdotes. How many of you received some sort of tuition stipend or tuition remission graduate assistantship as part of your graduate work? Okay, almost everyone. Great. So anyone want to jump in and tell us a little bit about how that came about?
I'll start.
Okay.
So when I was looking at master's degree programs, and that's how I started my graduate career. And to be clear, I thought I was going to go to law school, and then I decided at the last minute I didn't want to do that. So I had to do a pivot pretty quickly. I applied to a number of schools, and what I often tell students is, for graduate school, you got to see who's buying, right? You know, who's willing to help pay you get through this opportunity, which is not necessarily going to be a cheap one. So for me, you know, I had 2 very explicit offers for grad assistantships. One came from American U, which is where I ended up going. The other one was not fully in hand yet from the Rockefeller School at the U of Albany. It was not an open invitation. It's one of these things that I got the assistantship with no idea what I would be doing in that position, right? And that's something that I think students who are looking at grad school have to be aware of, that you often won't get your assignment until literally the first day you walk in, you know, to that orientation. And again, we may or may not talk about this, but I'll say for me, my initial assignment, which was, I should say the stipend itself was tuition plus a $5,000 stipend, which in Washington, D.C. didn't go very far, but it was also X number of years ago that maybe it didn't matter all that much. And you know, but when I walked in, I was assigned to a social science computer lab, which was comical because I had never been on a computer in my entire life at that point. But they trained me and developed me, and the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah.
So
maybe I'll move on to Sarah so you can give us our perspective, how similar it is or different it might be when it comes to librarianship.
So I applied to only one school, Syracuse University, School of Information Science. I applied originally for the Information Resource Management program, not library science, although it's the same school that had library science. And I was awarded a scholarship, tuition scholarship that covered really all of the fall and spring semester work. I ended up doing summer work that I paid for myself, which was probably foolish. I probably didn't have to do that, and took loans for that. But I was also awarded an assistantship. And I think, like you, Scott, I did not know what it was going to be at the time. What it turned out to be was abstracting and indexing documents for the Educational Resource Information Clearinghouse that was housed at Syracuse University. So I did that, and I did that at home, but I did not know what it was going to be. And the unfortunate thing about that assistantship was I really didn't have any contact with other graduate assistants, which would have been very nice. But I didn't have any options. I didn't have money to pay for graduate school. So if I had not gotten the scholarship and assistantship, I don't know that I would have gone.
So I want to take this in a different direction to try to hit the point that I'm hoping to make is that how did you even know that, tuition remission or an assistantship was possible for graduate school?
for me, it was an advisor in my undergraduate campus that sort of pushed me in terms of what I first said, which is make sure you're applying and people are paying you to to do this. So that's where I got my initial information, and then reading up on the application process, the granting process at the individual institutional level. Usually there was a box on the application. Do you want to be considered for? Yeah. And you hit every box, right? Scholarship, assistantships, fellowships, and
I would second that. I checked all the boxes, and I was working at the time. I wasn't coming straight from undergraduate school. So I think I knew just from the website that there were scholarships and assistantships available. And I crossed my fingers and hoped that I would get one.
I like to chime in because I'm one of the people who did not have an assistantship. I did get tuition reimbursement from my employer at the time. I'm a first-gen college student. My mom is an immigrant, and both my parents are working class people. No idea about college. When I went to undergrad, I was on my own. I had to figure everything out, much like a lot of our students are. And I did not get good advising. My faculty advisor was too busy for me. They just signed off on my registration every semester and was like, keep going. And I was actually a biology major, and I had a minor in chemistry. My intent was to go to medical school. There was no way I was going to medical school with my grades. And so I never had a good relationship with anybody on campus who would mentor me and say, like, let's talk about other options. Like, what else can you do that, you would enjoy, that's related. And so I think that one of the reasons I went into student services for a career and working with college students is that experience, because I don't want any student to ever feel like there's nobody that they can, who understands their issue, who understands what's going on. And so going into graduate programs, I was married. I had a 1-year-old at the time. I was probably like 24. And I decided I wanted to get my master's degree because I really hated my job. And I said, I gotta do something else. I was actually working admissions for a for-profit college. And I was really bad at it because I was too honest with people. And which is not a qualification for the job. And I decided to go get a master's degree because way too far into my program, I had a professor in an elect to tell me that I should have been a different major. And I was like, great, where were you 3 years ago? But I paid for my master's program with some of the tuition reimbursement. After I started working at the community college I was working at was when I made the decision to go back for my doctorate, because I really wanted to continue to make a difference for these students. And I knew that in order to be a change maker, you have to do the education in order to get to those positions to be able to do that. And so I think then in my position now on campus, helping students to realize that you're more than just this, you're more than just a number, you're more than just your GPA. There's more to you than that, and there's more possibilities than what you're experiencing, and we just need to figure out what those things are.
That's a great way to transition into our second question. So obviously being a good student seems pretty key to maybe being a professor at some point or working in higher education. But you are more than your GPA. And I'm sure we've all known and met and worked with many talented students that maybe if they worked a little harder, spent more time studying, they would hit the mark that you want them to hit. But they've got those sort of other intangibles or those talents or skills that you think that would make them a really successful college professor. So let's talk a little bit about that. Other than being just a straight up nerd for your discipline, which we all,
Helps.
yeah, definitely helps. And we all are. What are some other things that faculty can look for in terms of identifying students who would be good for the academy?
So I'm gonna take this. I have a similar experience with Christina. My parents were immigrants. They don't read or speak English, so everything I did in college by myself, including signing their signature to forms, because I have everything, or putting something in front of them because they didn't know what to read and said, please sign this, and they just signed it. So, and I also was not a good student, so I would probably be one of the students here in this esteemed group that was not a good student in the first couple of years. And to piggyback, I had actually great mentors. I had an advisor who told me my junior year, Joe, you need to get out of this major. There's no way in hell you're going to graduate with this major.
Oh, wow.
Find another major and graduate, and then go figure out what to do with it. And to this day, that's the best advice I've ever gotten. I respect her that, and I tell my students the same thing, because it's just an honest truth. There was no way I was going to graduate that particular major. And the point I'm trying to make is sometimes we all see the star students. Those are the easy ones to see. But we don't see the ones that are the diamond in the rough. And I think with a little bit of mentoring and polishing from faculties, deans, those could be our star professors. You know, not everybody's going to be a 4.0. So I joke in my family, my kids have better GPA than I do. My wife has a better GPA. Luckily, my kids got my wife's brain and not mine, so they're all going to do well. But I think there are other paths, and I think for first generation college students, all they hear is you need at least a 3.0.
Yeah.
And that just cuts them right off. And I tell you, I did not have anything close to a 3.0 as an undergraduate student. I still have a master's degree from Bowling Green State University in college student personnel. But it was my mentor says, okay, you didn't do well in the grad, go take some graduate courses in non-matric, prove you're a good student. You know, call the schools, talk to them, what do they want to see, so that they could at least be considered rather than being a number. Oh, you're below 3.0. And I think having faculty and other staff walk our students through that process gives them that hope. You know, it's easy to have the 4.0, and you know, that's a different thing. But you know, I think that's really, if we're going to increase our diversity, I think that's the place we need to work on.
Yeah, I'll echo some of those statements. I think when I arrived in undergrad, you know, my dad didn't go to college. He was a pipe fitter and in the trades, and the idea of filling out financial aid paperwork was very, very scary to him. Just to look at paperwork was scary to him and what it meant. I mean, he said to me one time, they're going to come take away our house if you don't get a job and pay for this, you know, and he was very nervous about anything about loans. And so my mom was actually attending college the same time I was, and we were both trying to navigate it. And of course, she was navigating it as an adult student. And so I think I have a lot of compassion for students going back to school. And to your point, I think the reason I'm in grad studies is because I thought the whole process for graduate school was a big dark black box that I just didn't understand and did not have a flashlight for.
Right.
So my strategy really was through a lot of observation. I would watch And I don't know if I had a particularly good advisor that I was assigned to, but I knew who the good advisor was in the department, and I would lurk around her office. And I would, and I would just, I found out what clubs she was advising and I joined them. And then I observed that she would send one person a year to a grad program and they would write an article every year about this one student who was fully funded. And I thought, oh gosh, I got to map this out. So when it's my turn, I'd be that one student. And so I did go to her. Now, I thought I was a good student. I went to a rural high school. I had like a 90 average, but when I arrived in undergrad, I was in a non-credit English class and a non-credit math class to get started. And so that was like very shocking to me. But I think when it came down to graduate school and having that first conversation with the advisor, she looked right at me and said, well, you're not the best writer. And I remember saying to her, well, what do I need to do to get better? And she had said, for every class that you take from here on out, you need to gather the syllabus and look at the papers and the assignments for that class, and only choose electives that make you write papers, research papers in particular, and do not take classes that have multiple choice tests. And then I asked if I could be a research. They didn't have research assistants at this small college, but we crafted one together, and I helped her with her research. I think what she saw in me was a huge level of curiosity. Like, I just want to know how it all works. And I want to be involved, and a huge level of persistence. I mean, she told me the recipe, I wrote it down, and I just did whatever she told me to do. And I think that when I look out into the classrooms today, some of those metrics, Jen, to your question, are things like how curious are they? And you can usually find that out by the people who are asking the questions, not necessarily answering the questions, who are your 4.0 students, right? But the ones that are like, so how does this connect to this? So the people who are looking for interconnectivities between theories or disciplines, or this class and that class, or didn't we hear in the first class this? And so I think curiosity and persistence are two different metrics that I think beyond GPA that are super helpful. And I find myself writing about that when students are asking for letters of recommendations for graduate school. And of course, the seat that I sit in now, I read a lot of letters. But I do think, that when people speak about their level of curiosity, the level of how they're connecting concepts, and their level of persistence, because we all know graduate school is hard. And so how are they gonna sort of persist and go through those challenges and being able to find resources that are gonna help them? That's my experience.
Can I make one more comment?
Of course.
I think one of the comments, if we're going to increase diversity, is especially with first generation students, they don't know what they don't know. And even your perfect 4.0 might not know it. Scott and Kristen, I'm going to tell the story of a EOP student who graduated with a 4.0 in biochemistry several years ago. And the student did not believe she can go to grad school, get a PhD.
Well, in fact, as that student that we talk a lot about in Dean's Council, frankly, I think I've raised it 3 or 4 times in Dean's Council that
Yeah.
you've got a 4.0 EOP. My memory is that she was African-American, female, biochem. She could have rode her ticket to probably anywhere that she wanted to go. And my memory is that she had said, well, I'm going to work for a year and then go to grad school so I can get some money to go to grad school. And it's like, and
sometimes they have that imposter syndrome. I don't think I'm good enough.
Yep.
And they don't know the process. And I remember telling the story. I said it was my fault as director. I should have known better. I should have encouraged her much earlier and should have taken more interest to know where she is. But
a lot of this also is about relationships. I mean, you talked about lurking, and you never know where those relationships are going to pop up, because this particular student came up on my screen because she happened to be talking to my wife Debbie in the IR office, because the comm and marketing division was trying to find good stories for their upcoming graduating class, right? And they often would ask IR, can you have any thoughts, any ideas of where we ought to be poking around? And this student popped up on her screen, and it's like, but it was like 5 Kevin Bacon removals, to finally get this person connected to the right person. And I think that gets at that idea of not knowing what you don't know sometimes, and not even know who to ask.
Yeah, who to get back to this imposter syndrome, like, who deserves a seat at the table? I mean, I remember being a master's student and they gave us, I think, 10 weeks to write our first paper. And every week I wrote 4 pages and then wrote 4 more and then wrote 4 more. And I remember the day it was due, I went to the master's office, I printed it, checked it one more time, printed it out. And I get there and I got there 2 hours before the class just to make sure it was all set. And the girl next to me was literally just starting. And she was pumping it out. And I'm looking at her like, oh, this poor soul. She's just never gonna, right? And 4 weeks later, I found out we got the same grade. And I thought to myself, so when I was defending my dissertation, I remember talking to my advisor and I said, and he said, you should really go on to graduate school. I don't deserve to go on. Like, that person deserves to go on. They can crank it out in 2 hours. What took me like 10 weeks to write. And he said, right, but this idea of being able to, I guess that's where persistent comes in. But the other point I think he was trying to make too, that I think helps in faculty life, is this idea of being able to persevere through obstacles, right, and levels of rejection, and being able to just keep showing up and just keep showing up. I mean, I remember being a department chair and having to mentor a faculty member who had just stacks of articles on their desk that were just too scared to get rejection letters. I mean, just stacks of manuscripts that weren't sent out because they were fear. And here's me going, oh, I have no fear of rejection. But I do think that this, if we're looking out in there and having people persevere through several different obstacles, it does say a lot about the character that will help them in the academy as we're faced with lots of different changing environments, changing student populations, and being able to succeed across teaching, service, and research.
So let's talk a little bit more about how we help these students. So what are some other resources, and we can talk about just general resources in your experience or resources that the Division of Graduate Studies offers, you tell me, but what else do students need to know? So we want them to have some, a discipline in which they're passionate about, and maybe they want to pursue more depth. But what else? What else should they be thinking about, asking about, working toward?
So it's interesting that we're having this conversation today because we're working with a student right now who just graduated and she got a 2.7-ish GPA, and she contacted us after graduation because she thought the best thing for herself to do was to go to Penn Foster and get a vet tech certificate so that she could work in the vet field for a year or two and then go on and become a veterinary doctor after that, because she thought the experience and the credits, all of it was going to fix everything. And so, having the conversation with her and saying, why are you selling yourself short? Mm-hmm. Why is this what you think is the answer to your issue? Like, why is this it? And her saying, well, I have a bad GPA, I'm not going to any graduate program. I said, there is a graduate program for everybody. There are people, there's more to this than just the number and what you're seeing on paper. And so I think this student actually came in as a transfer. So she came in her junior, so I didn't have her for the full 3 years that I've had some students in the CSTEP program, but she had some financial obstacles in the beginning and definitely connected with me. And then just trust was built from that relationship. And so when it came time for her to ask these big questions or to ask for help, she was very comfortable in doing that. But I see a lot of me in that. And I'm like, I understand exactly where you're coming from, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, nobody's going to want me in a biology master's program, barely made it out undergrad. So I think the big thing is when students come to office hours, when students come to your office and talk to you and make that effort, doing everything you can to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel like you can be trusted, to just have a connection with them is so impactful and powerful. I myself as an undergrad, I took organic chem. Whoa. That was bad. And I had a professor, Dr. Jackson, who I remember to this day. He used to wear a tie-dye lab coat to class every day. And I went to his office hours every single time I could because I was struggling in that course. And he would work so hard to try and help me, but I made a relationship with him. And so when I graduated, before I graduated, he asked me, "You're not a chemistry major?" I said, "No." He's like, "Okay, we're good then." But when I graduated, I said, "Would you be willing to write me a letter of reference for potential jobs, whatever's next?" He said, "Absolutely." And he wrote about the persistence that I had and the fact that I kept pushing forward. But if I had not created that relationship with him, I would have never had that connection. And those are the things that are important to students. You know, I talk a lot when I was a student services person because we're advising, we're doing all these other things about how the magic happens in the classroom. And we're fully aware of that. Student services people, we tend to work in the background. We're making sure operations are working, we're making sure things are happening. And obviously there's connections being made there too. But in the classroom is taking an interest in a student who is curious, who has interest, who comes to those office hours is so critical to making sure that they feel like there is something more for them than just like trying to get a good grade. So I think my advice is like for our faculty members is just, you know, it's simple. It's really simple. Just be like human with them and just make them feel comfortable and make them feel like, you know, you're having a real conversation with a real person. And those office hours people, those are the people that are making that extra step, because I can't tell you how many times I was like, "You guys going to office hours?" You know, they're scared. They're scared to come to your office because, you know, you're up here. There's a power dynamic. And so just creating an environment where they can feel like they're human, you're human, and we're two people who can have a conversation is just so critical to helping them to make sure that they're getting into the help that they need, connecting those dots for resources on campus and for graduate school, all those things. So it really starts with that relationship that can be built between a student.
I mean, EOP, we started Kristen's office volunteer. We have something called, you know, other office actually comes to our office and sit in there. And Christian's office, a graduate studies sent an advisor. I think the first day she didn't have anybody. Second day, she had 2 people. And then it exploded. She had people all over, but she developed that relationship with the graduate advisor. And we told them it's just not graduate study at Oswego, it's anywhere. And so, I mean, she was helping them out of those office hours, reading personal statements, helping. And once they have that relationship, they're going to clam on to you. They're going to trust you. And that's what we need to build. I mean, I see Dr. Lynn Blanchfield on the Zoom call. She does a scholarship workshop for us every winter session. And she can tell you, you know, the students go to her because they trust her now. You know, she's done it for the last 3 semesters for us during winter session about writing scholarship statement and personal statement. So connecting the students to resources. I don't have that ability. I know enough to be dangerous, but someone who knows how to do something and making that, I call it the soft handoff, and making that connection. And if they think you're introducing them to someone, you must trust them, and they trust you, so they're going to trust that person. So I think that's the important part, is making those connections. As Christina said, if they come to your office hours, they're nervous as hell walking in there. You know, stop what they're doing, spend time with them, or if you don't have time, be honest. I don't have time at this moment, you know, but if they get the blow off, they're never going to come back to you.
I want to push a little bit on the office hour thing. And it gets at, I think, some of the comments that have already been made in terms of students are scared or nervous. I think we've all see issues. Those issues become more problematic after COVID as well, even in the context of very general social dynamics, interpersonal dynamics. And I do think, I mean, I was one of those faculty members when I was full-time teaching that was in the office all the time. Okay. And I would beg students to come see me. It was really pathetic, you know, and I was a good advisor. You know, not to toot my horn, but I was a good advisor. And yet still, there's lonely Professor Furlong sitting in his office, when no one coming to see him. And it really took me a few years to get to the point where I had to really be much more proactive with that. And I think as faculty, we need to be, whether that's you are required to come see me in the first 2 weeks, and here's a schedule I'm going to pass around the room for 15-minute blocks just to do that. I would send out emails to students who I thought had some capacity in the areas that I was teaching. That was partially to draw majors also. I taught a lot of introductory classes, so this was a way of doing that. They appreciated the emails, even if they were saying, no, I don't want to major in that. They would often write back and said, well, thanks for noticing, I don't want to do it, or thanks for noticing. Yes, I'd love to stop by. It's not enough, I don't think, these days to sit there and wait for students to come into your office hours. I just don't think it was never like that. Right, really, in many ways. And I think it's even less so like that now. So, I would really encourage not only to make it easy for them when they're talking to students, but to provide the invite, almost a personal invite, or if necessary, requirement to come do that.
And then even one of the things I think about is just beyond the invite are like strategies and tools to help them engage. So for example, some of the things I've heard myself say is always scan a faculty member's office for clues. Like they don't put their degrees on the wall because they're bragging. They're putting their degrees on the wall so that people ask them, hey, what was it like at West Virginia? What was it like at Miami, as conversation starters, right? And also giving them the conversation starters during the invite or in the syllabus, like come and, or if for those people that do the soft handoffs, it's oftentimes it's like, oh, thanks so much for introducing me to this friend. Like, now what do I do? I'm sitting in their office, or you see the deer in headlight at your office door, like, hi, so-and-so sent me, and they get nothing. And so helping them with just that first question, go ahead and ask them. I used to joke, because I guess I can as a family member. I said, oh, faculty members just love to talk about themselves. So just lean into that, just say, how did you find funding for graduate school, and what made you decide on that school? And, you're off to the races once you get them talking, right? So, so I think helping them with the conversation starters, or their verbally, or having them sort of observe the nonverbal environment of their office helps them as well.
I'm going to chime in on that. So that's actually a really big piece of like there's a method to, advising admissions called appreciative advising. And one of the tenets of that is creating an environment in your office that is inviting, but also represents you. And so if you're a Game of Thrones fan, put up your poster on the wall, because inevitably a student is going to walk in and be like, oh, cool, I love Game of Thrones too. I had a comment one time from, I want to call an old school boss, who was the provost of my campus where I was a dean. I have pop culture stuff in my office. I have like Funko dolls, I have like just fun stuff like in my office. And she came into my office one day and said, this doesn't look like a dean's office. And I said, great, that's what I want. I don't want it to look like a dean's office. I don't want it to look scary, and I don't want it to look like these people aren't being welcomed here. I was like, I can't tell you how many times students walk in nervous, but see something and are like, oh my gosh, like, do you love Disney characters too? I was like, yeah, I love Disney. Let's talk about Disney, I got princesses. What do you want to talk about? And starting those conversations like that, it just is that. I'm going to echo Lynn with the lollipops. You will hear me tell my students all the time that I have food in my office. I do. The grant allows me an opportunity, as long as I create a program for it, there's a thing. So we talk about food insecurity, but I have food in my office. And so even just telling students, come by and get a snack. Come by and get something, just pop in and say hi. It's so minimal, but like they're like, oh, I didn't know all this was here. So I'm like, yeah, come by. So I think just putting yourself into your environment is really critical too. Like I said, they just want to speak to a human. Yeah, Jackie, it's snacks, drinks, candy.
Yep, I have chocolate.
Yeah, Joey always has candy. That's, I know that.
So I do want to thank everyone in the chat for your great comments, Laura in particular, that got us started. So thank you, Laura. So as we start to maybe wind down a little bit and give some time to our friends on Zoom if they want to chime in. We started, I think, busting some myths already. So letting students know it's not about the GPA, you're more than your GPA. And just because you don't have a 3.0 doesn't mean you can't go to grad school. Maybe busting the myth that just because we put that we have office hours on a syllabus that students are actually going to show up. So we need to maybe rephrase that a little bit and let them know the benefits or what happens during office hours and actually having an environment that is welcoming and accessible to students. What else? What are some myths? What are some other myths that you think people are still sort of spewing out there in terms of graduate school?
Well, oftentimes I think when people ask me about graduate school, they think there's like a best fit way to go about it. You know, like what's the best pathway or what is the one way of, and obviously there is no one way path. And I often try to get folks into a space of self-reflection around what have they learned about themselves from this point forward, about how they study, how they learn, what are they curious about, how they want to improve a discipline. And I try to get them thinking about when they're making a large decision like graduate school, what are going to be the game breakers, the deal breakers? What are deal breakers for you? Sometimes it's location, sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's, you know, wherever your social support network is. Maybe you need to be close to a hospital system. Maybe you need to be close to transportation. So there are deal breakers, and having people sort of line what those up. So it's the process, right? I love the idea that we started this conversation about sort of building these relationships with faculty that I think they don't begin and end in the undergrad. You know, oftentimes people have been out working for years and come back and say, remember me? And so I think those relationships are really critical, but I think once students start to maybe open themselves up to the idea of graduate school, the advice that we can give folks around how to do the research, how to delineate between an applied master's and a research master's, or I need to go to the, like they'll often say, I need to go to this school first because of these reasons. And then, you know, when you're talking to people, you can make it work. There's rarely a really wrong graduate school decision. It's sort of, but how can you make that decision work for you once they're there? So I try to take the pressure off. Choosing the school is not necessarily your make or break. It's what you do when you're there. You can get it work experience while you're doing your graduate degree. You can do that. You can study abroad. You can do interdisciplinary work. You can cross some of the learning outcomes with other programs. So we can make it work if you have a particular goal in mind. But I do think that people do think that there's sort of a one-way approach to graduate school, and I just don't think that's really the case. I think it's really smart for folks to look around as soon as we go and ask themselves, who are conversations I can have with people that are going to sort of enhance my understanding around the different types of pathways. There is no one size sort of fits all for students going into graduate school. And even just around this table, like nobody actually really knows. Even if you think you're going to be a faculty member, here I am in administration, who knew you were going to be, you know, you just don't know, but you want to put yourself in situations that give you opportunities. And then once you're there, leveraging whatever their gifts are at those institutions to help enhance you going forward is an ongoing discussion. So I do think that students do get stressed out about, I got to make the perfect decision in this moment. And I think kind of demystifying that and saying, well, once you're there, you can do this or that, you know, but we can make any of your decisions work for you. Very rarely do people take a master's degree, complete a master's degree and say, gosh, I wish I didn't do that.
Yeah.
So here's some myths that I didn't know, even when I was starting my career. You don't have to start at the master's level. You know, in this day and age, and again, this is about, you know, diversity in a professorship, which is likely going to require you to have a doctorate. You can go right into a PhD program. I didn't know that 35 years ago, and I don't think, why would anybody know that? I mean, it just, we think about things in progressions, and yet, most programs these days will take you directly in to a PhD program, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, we'll do that. So that, I think that's, a myth, particularly if you're seeing a student who has, capacity and interest and drive and perseverance and all the stuff that we talked about, and are thinking of a career in academia. They'll get the master's along the way in many cases, but they really ought to be sort of looking at PhD programs. So that's a myth. The pathway issue is a myth too. I mean, and understanding that what you think you're going to do or want to do in your graduate school is actually where you end up. And I can speak with some parental experience with that one, right? I had a daughter, thought for sure she was going to be going to a PhD psych program, didn't end up there at all, and is thriving. It's about interest, right? It's about passion. It's about finding that advisor at that graduate level that really is lighting and making that spark grow. The other thing is that graduate studies is somehow this unbelievably hard thing to do. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is a hard thing to do. But my experience, and what I say to students or have said to students, it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. And you do things that you enjoy. And you build a camaraderie with your cohort, and you are engaging in, Jen talked about being a nerd, and in a way that you had to be like great, like an A student. Sometimes just being a nerd in the field, just really enjoying field, is enough to get you, to that next stage. And then, you surround yourself with smart people. And there is osmosis that happens with that, right? And that's really valuable. So it's not just like, well, I barely got through undergrad, how can I possibly do grad school? You can, if that's something that's really driving you, that's something you can do. So
Yeah, when I think about first gens or even my own experience, I don't think I would have cared what graduate program I got into. All I knew for me at that time was I didn't grow up in a family that had conversations about intellectual issues. I hated high school because it felt very I didn't have that language at the time, but it wasn't until I got to college, I'm like, wow, I just want to be in rooms where people are talking about things and are able to talk without fighting. That was my only threshold, was like, wow, these people can agree to disagree. That's not a concept that lives in my household. So I just wanted to be in the room. If someone said, hey, come to our MBA, I would have had an MBA right now. If someone would have said over here. And so I do think about those things that aren't discipline driven, or you're waiting for someone to answer the question that I hate so much, which is like, what do you want to do?
Right.
That's driving so much of these questions. It's sort of like, I would have done anything just to continue this experience about being in rooms where people were curious and wanting to learn things. And so I try to put myself back in that space when I'm talking, because other times I hear folks like, I can't afford graduate school. Well, what does that really mean? Right. So what I know now, being in this space, is, everybody gets financial aid. Most of that financial aid can pay for the cost of attendance at graduate school. So what does that mean? Does it mean that we have a fear of loans? So we have a fear of what does that mean? Or we don't know how to pay for things or how to get access. So I think, trying to unpack what are those things that people may not understand, or what's really driving their decisions. I also worked with a first gen student who, wanted to, stay at SUNY Oswego because this is the first time that they've built a social support network that values higher education. They can't go home. At their home, they don't value higher education. So like, I want to stay here as long as I possibly can to sort of leverage the fact that I have people here that support me in this venture. And so, not everybody's decision is based on either the discipline itself or the cost. So trying to think back, like what matters to people in the process of getting them through. So I think social support for first gen students is critical, because you can have all the money in the world and be in the best program. But sometimes I think we really underestimate the parental or the extended family's view of higher education. Sometimes they are the support system, and so engaging parents in these conversations is really critical. Or even when we're talking with students, be asking them, what does your family think about this? Is there a family person that was an advocate for you in this space? What kind of conversations are they having at home? So we can help the family develop the language around, I think what you're referring to is holistic admissions, right? It's not just, there isn't a GPA cutoff. We are looking at things holistically. And so that can help people develop letters that may justify a particular GPA, and develop packages that are really competitive based on their writing sample, for example. So I do think that, sort of expanding the repertoire of the things that we're discussing with them to try to unpack the psychological barriers to graduate education would be helpful.
So I do want to make sure that if anyone on Zoom has any comments. So open up to the floor to anyone on Zoom. If there's anything today that you've heard that you want to elaborate on or questions you want to ask. Laura, thank you for your chat comment.
Actually, hi gang. Can I ask Scott a question and kind of refresh my memory? I've actually just gotten my first student off to the NC State for a doctoral program. It's the first student we've pushed forward out of our master's in a very long time, let's say. How do we, the Prodigy program, this idea of expanding the Professoriate, how do we get these people back? Can you help me refresh?
Great question.
Well,
in
I think if you maintain the right connections, right, with these students, and you think that they do want to come back, there is an application process within the Prodigy, at least for the fellows program. The initial Prodigy faculty program, which came out of SUNY, has been a bit dormant for the last year or so, but the fellows program is still working. If we're talking about this particular student, but any student, when they get to a point where they're, let's say ABD or postdoc, they just basically need to go through the application process, right? And I will say, Rich, it is not going to be a surprise probably to you. It's not like we've ever had any tech people in the fellows program, right? I mean,
Yeah.
That's not an area, as you know, where there's a lot of students generally, and that's again, I'm a really big believer that if we can get a good person back, whether their own student or whoever, and we have the ability to slide them into a tenure track, we should be able to do that, assuming a variety of things, but that there's a process for that.
Great question. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks.
In terms of myths of graduate school too, I think a lot of those, I concur with all of your conclusions. I think the other thing that is a myth about graduate schools is that students who have accommodations for various learning concerns or issues are not going to get those accommodations in graduate school, which is not true. We need diversity in all ways. And I speak from experience because my son has autism, but now he's in a PhD program to study autism. And his grades were not the only thing that mattered. It was his experience, his passion, the support he got from faculty members, his unique vision of what he wanted to accomplish. And I think we have a real great, we have a mission to really help students who are diverse in lots of different ways, including people who have different kinds of learning concerns or learning issues. And I think in terms of the other issue, I know this is an earlier comment, but I would just also like to say, we got to start with these people their first year of college. We've got to identify people immediately. I've worked with students from their first year of college, trying to get them to do extra service things, trying to get them to do extra. There's a public policy weekend that I got one student to do in her first year of college, and that just led to other things and kept transforming into other things that she got. So we really need to work hard, not just individually, but with all of our classes. We need to help students know that this is an option for them if they choose to take that. So, but thanks for all of your comments.
Yeah. I'd like to add, Jackie had to get off the call, Jackie Wallace, but to a point that Christina made earlier and Kristen, and my angle with all of this is I want to share with students what library science is all about and try to get particularly BIPOC students, hopefully our undergrads, going into pursue their MLS degree and then hopefully coming back as librarians. Librarianship is very underrepresented with librarians of color. About 85% of librarians are white and female. But even when I went to library school, I didn't go for library science. I didn't know anything about library science until I got into my graduate program. So our students don't even know what their options are. They don't know about these careers, so many different careers and fields they don't know. So I think I mentioned Jackie because I know within career services, there's all kinds of efforts to, have career exploration. So I'm really excited from at least from the library science point of view. We've started already having library science career panels, and I plan to start doing 2 a year library science career panels to try to create awareness of the field, because people don't know it's an option. And Christina, you mentioned that before, you didn't know what your options were, and you mentioned as well, Kristen, like you could go to any program. So come to library science.
I think that Lynn, your point on in the recruitment space is really well taken. I think we have a concept in communication called homophily, which is basically the extent to which we tend to interact with people who are similar than us. And so, but it can work both ways, right? I think from the mentorship side, if we can find students and connect them to graduate students that they find themselves to be similar, they can kind of see themselves in it. And I think that we have an opportunity to do that work.
I agree.
And then on the other hand, it can kind of work against us in the faculty space because we tend to see ourselves in certain students, and we tend to interact and boost those students. And so when I had to do some deep, hard reflection on all the students I've sent to doctoral programs, and guess what? They looked a lot like me. They were first gen white women, and I can name them all off and where they are. And so I think this concept that we have to really stretch ourselves as faculty to sort of not just lean in to those students that remind us of ourselves, but to really be thinking consciously and intentionally about reaching across to and be looking at those metrics that you pushed us to think about, John, which is who are those curious students? Who are those students who are demonstrating persistence? And so that's the work I feel like I'm doing most recently, is really reflecting on past behavior in order to sort of engage in better future behavior around this idea of diversifying the academy.
So give Christina the last word and then we'll have to wrap things up.
So it's appropriate last word. I think as faculty members, the best thing you can do is to talk about yourself and to talk about your job. As an undergrad, I was involved in Res Life. I was involved in other things on campus. And when I saw those people who ran those programs, I was like, these people just never left college. Like, I'm not going to be that, like I'm going to leave, like I'm going to go get a job and be an adult. I think if someone had told me that higher education is a career, I would have considered that and maybe gone right into a master's program right after college. And so talk about yourselves, talk about your experiences, talk about why you love being a faculty member, talk about why you like being in the classroom, talk about why you like teaching. All of those things will click with students, and they will start to see that there is a possibility that like, I could be this person. They're telling me how much they love their job and they love the same things that I love. So like, maybe this is something that I should consider. So don't be afraid to talk about yourselves and tell people how great it is to be a faculty member and how great it is to work with college students, because they need to hear that too.
That is great. Wonderful, appropriate last word. So thank you, Christina. Thanks to those on Zoom for joining today. Please take the conversation back to your departments and to your colleagues, and we'll see if we can find a way to continue the conversation in a systematic way as we move forward. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, y'all. Great job.
We all wave on Zoom now.